There's a kind of a thing that's like, you want to see, God or the universe laugh, make a plan, right? Make a plan. This is exactly how this is going to happen. And then, watch it just, rain down surprises. And I think that in many situations, right, the path to happiness involves allowing yourself to see that it's okay to be different. And with families, we don't even know all the differences. Like if we begin to think that somebody else is the same as us, we're probably wrong. We just because we don't see it necessarily, we don't know. And allowing yourself the flexibility to say, even if I don't think I look like what's next door, I'm gonna be happy anyway. I'm gonna love these people and live from my heart.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're joined by Amy Stone, and we're going to talk about the experience of a step parent. Amy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here today with you guys.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Now, let's start off by learning about you. Who is Amy Stone?
Once upon a time in a land far, far away, there was a little girl born. No. So today, as I talk to you guys, I am a stepmom, I am a mom, I am a wife, and I am a life coach who assists step parents and adults in blended families to create their own path to happiness.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, a couple of things you mentioned there, being a mom and being a stepmom. Just from my little bit of research that I did, I've learned that you were actually a stepmom before you were a mom. So can we talk about that dynamic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. So there are a bunch of different ways that people become step parents, right? And the way I became a step parent is that when I was in my 20s, not thinking about marriage, actually quite not thinking about marriage. I wasn't intending to get married. I was going to go be a hermit with cats in a yurt. And I started dating a coworker, just went to a happy hour. It went to a happy hour, and yes, that the way you do in an office in your 20s, if that's a thing you've ever done, the last thing in my mind was a permanent relationship or a long-term relationship. And he was older than I was, which I thought nothing about. He had been married before, which I did not even pay. I mean, I was there for happy hour, like conversation and darts, right? And so that did grow into a very serious relationship. And it meant that when we got together and we got married, I was a step parent and I didn't have any kids yet. So I was a stepmother before I was a mom. And you call that either a child-free or a childless step parent. And there's a bunch of things that can mean. So in my case, it meant I didn't have any kids yet. It can mean that you don't want to have kids or you're unable to have kids. There's a couple different things that can mean depending on who you're talking to. In my case, it didn't mean I had kids yet. And as if the role of stepmom is not quite complicated enough, my immediate solution was to add some more kids to the equation. And you guys have kids, so you know that they never simplify things. Yeah. You can say a lot of things that are not absolute statements, but kids do not simplify anything, in my opinion.
Agreed. So it's interesting, right? Because I'm thinking, for people our age, we're 40, 41, if you find yourself single, a lot of people are looking on online dating, right? And you see in these profiles have kids. So for somebody like that, if they don't want to date somebody who has kids, they would swipe. That's for your situation, it was like you already had met, started talking, and I'm sure you found out shortly thereafter. But it was one of those things that you almost had that in, and then it was like, okay, am I okay with this? Am I not okay with this? Right?
100%. And so I will turn 50 next year. I'm 49. So I was dating and doing these things I think that online dating kind of existed, but I had a flip phone. I had like a Nokia phone. This was happening in a different time where we met people in groups of things. So the online dating and the awareness that of what somebody's profile is before you even think, am I going to have the conversation, is an advantage today that I'm not sure that we had. But I always tell people, I'm like, listen, this was not something that I thought a lot about and went into. I mean, I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was getting myself into. I thought it was going to be a lot easier than it was. And I just really didn't fully understand what I was doing. I just didn't question it. It's like, oh, okay, they're cute. I like them. I'm entertaining, let's go. And it is different. So I talked to a lot of people about, the decision to date somebody with or without kids, right? Because that is something that you should think about, right? You should definitely consider. I'm not saying I did consider it. I did not. But I think it is smart to do it. And some of it depends on what you're looking for, right? So in my case, that's the reason I mentioned that it was happy hour. Like, I mean, he could have had 27 dogs, 4 fish, and a horse. And I just wasn't a part of what I was having as the conversation. The first thing that we did was just happy hour. It wasn't there. And exactly like you're saying, once there was a connection, and there were a couple of thresholds in our relationship, then is when it was like, oh, there are kids. And there is a part of the story where my mom looked at me and was like, hey, do you really want to take this on? And being who I am, I thought that was a challenge. I thought she was questioning me, like, are you able, right? 20 years down the line, I can realize that she was trying to say, hey, this is a lot, but it is definitely something to think about. And it depends on whether or not, so if you're a person who's in their 40s and you're looking for a permanent relationship, then you got to think it's smart to think about it before you get into it. Right.
Right.
I was 24. I was like, want a beer? It wasn't on my radar, and I still made it work.
So then for the people that you work with now who, like, let's say, whether it doesn't matter the age, but either newly divorced or out of a relationship, and we're looking at both people have kids, right. Just from talking to friends and just, hearing stories, people, I think the stuff that comes up is, will I have time to date? Right. Because now you're co-parenting each groups of kids, and how will this work? I think that's the question that I hear all the time. So I would love to hear your thoughts around that.
So, the can it work discussion is really interesting, right? And I think that there's tremendous fortune and favor in the people who are smart enough to ask that question before they jump in. The majority of people that I work with fall into one of two groups, right? Like, so some people are forward planners, and they are looking to have these discussions before they get into a serious relationship. The other group are people who more mirror my experience, where they thought they understood it and they thought they had it covered, and now they get into it and they're like, oh, wow, this is not what I expected. Right. And so those are the two times that people will show up and say, oh, you know what? I need help. What's interesting is that planning beforehand can maybe sort of change some things. But in my opinion, a lot of this stuff doesn't show up until you're in it. Right. So, and I mentioned that for two reasons. One is, like, don't knock yourself on the head if you jump down this road and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know this was going to happen. There's a big piece of me that really wonders whether or not you can fully understand it until you're in it. And the thing that I will draw, the parallel that I offer people is that when you're pregnant with a child, which a lot of people have experienced or read about or seen somebody, right? Everybody on the planet tells you that you're not going to sleep a lot when you have that new baby. Like, strangers in the street come up to you and say, enjoy your sleep. And then when you go through it, you're like, oh my God, this is what people were talking about. Like, you totally think you're ready, and no one is ever ready. No one is ever ready, because there's a piece of it that doesn't show up until you're actually through it. So I offer that to people, like, don't be too hard on yourself if it's an unexpected transition, right? Because I don't know that you can be ready for all of it. There are things that you definitely can be ready for. And what I find very interesting is that there are a lot of the same things that we should be ready for when we get into any type of relationship, right? The things that really help in a blended family are things like talking about how you handle money, right? Getting real good at talking about having money and getting real good at communicating with the other person on tough topics, right? Those are things that's not family construct specific, right? That's like living together and being together for a long time and going through hard stuff. And so those are the things, those are the two things that I have a bigger list of like 5 or 6 things that I always suggest, like the conversations beforehand. But I don't think that it's blended family specific. I think it's like, hey, before we commit to spend 20 hours a day together, well, that's a post-pandemic number if you're working from home. But all this time together, these are the things that we want to talk about.
And one more thing, and I'll
pass
it over to you. Non-negotiables, right? Like, so
Right.
when you're dating with no kids, you have those. But I think it's heightened when there's now kids involved, or somebody like in your position where you didn't have your own biological kids. How about if you wanted, but your husband now was like, I'm done. Like, there's so many conversations that need to be had,
So many conversations,
especially when you're no longer in your 20s, when you're
100%.
in the 30, 40, right?
So my husband and I did have the kid discussion beforehand. There was a plan, right? It was a negotiation. I mentioned he's older than me, I think. So he already had 2 kids and he agreed to have 2 more kids, right? And so when we had 2 kids, I was like, oh, one more might be fine, but he had 4 and the oldest was like a teenager, right? Like, so we were in it. Like, teenagers are rough, as everybody knows. They're wonderful and I love teenagers, but it's like, watching somebody become an adult is like, it's like, oh my God. And so we were in it and I was like, one more. And he was like, nope. And he made his own vasectomy appointment, like called the doctor and was like, set it up, and then called his dad, had his dad come down and drive him to the thing. And I was not like upset, like we had agreed and this was like a legitimate thing, but it was like hilarious. He was like, this was the deal and I am not renegotiating.
I'm sticking to it.
There are other people who have different experiences, but that was ours. And I do think it's, I think it's really interesting. And he had a lot of legitimate like reasons for that. And that's one of the ways that we did it right. We had that conversation correctly. And I don't mean to put a judgment on it. Like we did it and it worked out. There's others that you think where the line is, and then you're not really in it until you're in it. And you won't know those until they come up. And then you have it questioned, right? Like you might think you have a really strong opinion on certain things, and our kids push us on those because they do things that we're not expecting. And the most extreme example of that is probably when you've got a kid who's experimenting with like an identity issue or something like that. And you may never have considered that as an adult, right? Like you've got people who have very important, fundamental, conservative upbringings who have children who push that boundary completely, and there's no way to plan for that. I don't think until it happens.
It comes up,
Or you've got kids that get sick or do dumb things. There's a long list of things that can push that.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just curious, based on your experience working with different clients, and some of your own experience as well. Do you feel that a lot of times as step parents coming into these situations, expectations aren't necessarily in alignment with reality?
Oh my God. Yes.
Tell us how you really feel.
So, yes. Oh my God. So it's a really, really rapid adjustment to becoming a step parent. So if you've got a family where you've got 2 parents and you decide to have a baby, and then, you have that whole conversation, or you don't, even if it's accidental, you've got 10 months where you're going through that whole thing. And then the first few weeks of that baby, they're like sleeping all the time and, so on and so forth. When you're a step parent, you're like, oh, da, 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 and you date and you have all these things. And then if you decide to move in together, right? Say I was child free, so, whatever. But if you've got 2 groups that you're Brady bunching it, right? You've got one day where you don't live together, and then you've got the next day where you all live together. Yeah. And it just comes slamming in together all at one time. And that it's like moving or doing anything like it's a very, very rapid adjustment. And there are people who can be prepared. There's a business connection that I have, and she was like a teacher and a therapist before she got divorced and remarried. And she's like, I did this with intention. She is the only person I've ever talked to who had that set of skills to be able to do that. The rest of us are like, we thought everybody would get along. I didn't understand. I had a completely unrealistic expectation of the impact on my daily life that having small children around would be, even though they weren't around all of the time. And that was me. That was not them. Right. Which is like, but at the time, if you had talked to me 17 years ago, I would have been like, those people. These are all that, right. It was me. I didn't know what I was getting myself into.
The other thing too that I think of it, and based on another interview that I was listening to that you had done, you were talking about the transition. Yeah. And I think about myself as an adult when I have to travel for work, or we were recently at my brother-in-law's cottage. Like, I take my own pillow with me. Like, there's certain
Right.
things that I just need to make sure that I adjust to the environment properly. But I can imagine it's probably even a greater impact on children having to transition between homes.
It is. So, and my parents were divorced as a kid. So I have experience as a kid, which, the way we remember things from our childhood is what it is. But I do remember how hard it was for me to switch between the houses. And I brought that experience into my relationship with my husband and his kids. And even with that, I got to witness it and not truly, and watch it. And it was still a challenge, right? So, and the other thing is it changes over the years. So my stepkids were 4 and 8 when I met them. A 4-year-old's pretty malleable. They go back and forth, and, they take stuff back and forth. But the older they get, the more it becomes them with their stuff, right? And the things that they want. So like the situation for a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old, they may not want to go in between houses because they've got their stuff. They want, they're like ready to be adults. So, but it can be a big thing. I think it's a lot harder in some ways than people want it to be. And one of the reasons I think it's so hard for adults, for us to understand, is that we're moving the children between our spaces. And so like, I'm already where I am. Like, it was hard for me to have the kids in my space. Definitely there were issues that I had with that because kids take over all of the space. Like in a house, everything is the child's, right? And there's no concept of, oh, this is your lotion. Is that why you had it up on top of the cabinet? I didn't. I just climbed up there and got it. But for them, they're moving in between, and I think that can show up in a bunch of different ways. My stepdaughter, when she was young, had a very distinct profile when she came to our house, and I completely misread it at the beginning. And I thought that she was like, judging me and inspecting. She would walk all through the house, and I thought I was making this all about me and judgment on me and all of these things. And then I was working with a therapist at the time, and they said, maybe she's just checking it out. Like, maybe she's getting comfortable in the space. So the next time it happened, I was like, hey, do you want to walk around and let's go see what's new? And I realized that's all it was. Like, so she was like, oh, there's a new chair over here, or a new poster over there, or look, that plant grew, or whatever. Like, she's checking out her environment for while she's going to be there. And it wasn't about me. It wasn't about me at all. And that shift allowed me to be more of the part of the process on her level, which was good. Although I wouldn't have known that then. I got to admit, that's me looking back with what I know now.
Oh, for sure. The other thing too that you mentioned was, you mentioned the 4-year-old being a bit more malleable, because if I remember correctly, the kids were 4 and 8.
4 and 8.
Now, I guess, is there kind of an age where that becomes more difficult if you're coming in as a step parent, where, the child may not necessarily be as easily adaptable to having a step parent?
So I'll answer this, but I'm going to put my little asterisk at the front, because there are some situations where this is totally not true. Do you guys know what alienation is, like family alienation?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are blended families where there's a high conflict sort of separation, and one parent is trying to play people off the other, in which case this would not be true. That's my little caveat there, right? When I became a step parent, somebody gave me this framework, and it proved true in my situation. And so I just continue to run with it. Where it came from, I don't know. This is a terrible, like, non-sourced piece of data, but I was told that 5 and under, they will sort of take you in as like an adult caregiver in their family, and older than 5, you're always going to be like an aunt, a friend, an extra adult.
Mm.
That has been true with my stepkids. Like, so the 5-year-old, he doesn't remember a time where I wasn't around, and he's more likely to use me as an adult type resource, always has been. The older one, also will come to me, but it is a more distant, I'm an extra person and there's more of a priority on the two biological parents. And it's been fine because she's got all her parents, and I never felt like I needed to step in. When it becomes more difficult, sort of depends on that little crazy thing that we go through called puberty. So like whenever the kids start asserting their own independence is when they begin to pull back from everybody. And that is sort of when it becomes harder. That's when it becomes harder to have a relationship with them at all. Like you're more like, becoming a contact. You have to honor them as their own individual human. They're hard to shop for. They're not easily swayed by sugary sweets, it's hard to like, so that's the age where it becomes harder to come in contact. And then there's a whole group of people who are becoming, I don't know that we would even use the word step parent at that point, but the largest group of divorce is now what we call the gray divorce, right? The people who are 50 and older who are getting divorced. Yeah. So in that case, those people are going to be adults.
Right.
So, and I don't know that they would even call you a step parent. That's like an adult relationship.
Yeah.
That is, hey, this is Amy's child. That's it. Like, so that's the other dynamic. I mean, can you imagine being 40 years old and have somebody come in and be like, I'm your mom? You'd be like,
yeah.
Is that what this is? Yeah.
I know. And I guess it's that fine line, right? Especially when you now go to fully blend in one home.
Right.
That's where, you could definitely see it getting interesting.
Very much.
So
it's hard to live with other people. It really
is. Like just with us, right? Like, family who's been together from the get-go, let alone, especially too, if the kids are similar in age, like,
oh my gosh,
there's just so many things that you see that can definitely be difficult to work through.
100%.
Process. Yeah. So I want to talk about parental guilt in now these blended families, or, even just with dating. And the reason why I bring that up is because there's so many scenarios that go through my mind. Okay. So I'm thinking, dating. So a parent dating, and then they have their child half the time. Then now, right. And then let's say, like your situation, Amy, where you now have you're married, you have your own biological kids. Now your husband, would there be times where he would feel like guilty that his kids weren't there enjoying in on, who knows, a family dinner a family vacation, like all that stuff, right? And, you see all the different scenarios that could play out here. But how are parents supposed to deal with that? I always wonder, like, how do you process all that when your own kids aren't there?
When you figure it out, let me know. No, I'm kidding. So, and guilt's cousin is resentment.
Yeah.
Right. So like, we'll talk about guilt, but resentment is sneaky right behind it if you're not careful. So my husband had a ton of guilt and a little bit of shame. Right. And he really struggled with that early on. And he had been divorced for a while before I met him. I wasn't like there along the scene. So in our house, we had a spread between the ages of the kids, which meant that we had some advantages. So when the new babies were little, we just dragged them along, and the big kids got to choose what we were doing. Like, so if we went to a theme park, they were really going, and I was like following around, and they were doing their thing. And then it became a kind of thing where, the younger kids started to do things, and we were asking the older kids to participate. And the kids in our family all get along well and have a nice relationship. And so that works out pretty well, and they were happy to do it. But let me tell you, teenagers do not want to go to like see Dora the Explorer live on ice and stuff like that, right? Like, so it's not, and so there are definite situations where we would do things with the younger kids, and the older kids would not come along. And sometimes My husband would be like, understand that he didn't even want to be at Dora the Explorer, so no guilt there. Like, you're lucky you get to stay home. But, like, there are other times it was hard for him to see them leave on the weekends. Like, they would come over and then leave. And where I, the stepmom, was like, oh gosh, a quieter house. Like, look at this. He was like really missing his kids. And so that was something we had to work out together. Like, we had to figure out a way for me to honor that. And give space for him and for him to be able to enjoy it. We're recording this right after the holiday season. And this is a really tough time for people who are recently divorced, and recently is probably 5 years and under, right? Because it's a big transition. If you've got a swap where you don't have the kids on one holiday or another, like, your first holiday without your kids, that can be a really nerve-wracking situation. And I don't have personal experience going through that. I have experience without being with one of my parents, but that's different, right? But I have experience with having kids move away as they're adults. That's also hard, right? Then you're without them, right? And the suggestion is usually to, honor it, right? But invest in yourself. Right. Invest in yourself, work on yourself. So how can you have a happy experience while your kids at somebody else's houses? How can you enjoy the moment that you have right now? And I think that that's pretty solid advice, because it tends to work for a variety of situations, right? To be mindful about this moment. This is the situation I have. How do I want to experience it? Right. And in a situation where you've got somebody who elected to end a relationship, right, there can be a really, really, really big temptation to want to shame yourself for it. I'm not sure that does any good, which is the reason to try not to lean too far into it. And there's a bunch of strategies for how to work through that, but it's a little bit like, rocking in a chair. You're just not going to get anywhere. How much time do you want to spend in that spot? You're just going to go back and forth. And so those are the things that those are, but it is a definite thing. Like, it is an absolute thing. And we go through it. I'll offer one other thing. We go through it even if we're not in a blended family, right? So if you have a bunch of kids and your sister or brother or cousin or a friend invites your kid to do something really cool, that's the same feeling. It's like, oh my God, my kid is doing this cool thing and I'm not there to see it. And one of the things that I think that's really helpful, with the exception of Dora the Explorer, if you don't want to be there, or the Wiggles or whatever it is, where you're like, thank God I'm not there. Like, if it's something where you want to do like some type of thing like that, I try to focus on the fact that, the kid is having this great experience and be happy for them. And then that gives me space to go and be like, all right, so what do I want to do? How many shows do I want to binge on Netflix so I feel good?
Fair enough. Now, that being the case too, it brings me to another thought. So with the kids transitioning between homes, when they're coming in, are the step kids more like house guests? Are they more like a part of the household, or does it kind of depend on the scenario?
It depends on the scenario and it very dramatically depends on the scenario, because you've got blended families who don't live in the same state, right? So then you would have people who are switching maybe on a school, like school year, I'll be with one parent, vacation with another. And that's going to feel weird. That's the split that my parents had. And I did always feel like a guest in one of the houses, even though I had my own space, even though there was new stuff, even though there was a lot of love. Like, I never gelled fully in one of those spaces. In a lot of spaces, a lot of places where you're close in proximity, you'll go back and forth during the week and over the year. When they're young, they will have two houses that they're sort of moving between. So in our house, they like duplicated everything. We had two of everything between these two houses when they were very, very young. That is unsustainable and very expensive. I don't recommend it. It's super easy when you're talking about like, paper airplanes and things. But once you start talking about like bikes and game machines and televisions, it's like, what? No.
Yeah.
And so then even if you're down the street, one house tends to be where the kids will be, right? And then they might go to the other house. So our kids always had space in our house, and we were insistent that these were their rooms, and it was fine. They felt all very happy. Once my stepkids got to be teenagers, they liked my house better when I wasn't in it, not because they don't love me. They do, because they used to, until they got caught, they used to love to throw parties in our house when we were So, they felt very much at home here. They just didn't need the bedroom. And that's the other thing that impacts it. Sometimes you have blended families where one house is more stable than the other.
Yeah, like just the rules, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like for, a couple who's married and they planned out, okay, when you're pregnant, right? How are we going to do this? I mean, you can only plan so much when it comes to parenting and, different things. You obviously get thrown into it, but you have those conversations, right? When let's say coming into it, he was already established in the way he parented his children, right? So you're just coming in for the ride, and it's almost like you got to just sit back, zip, and go.
Somewhat, right? Yeah, and then you have to. It's work to create the new traditions and the new culture, and that's the whole yours, mine, and ours, right? And in a blended family, there's a whole lot of tradition and habit and ritual that comes from the earlier relationship, and I call it like the hidden language. Like everybody in that group, like, so the ex, the kids, and your partner, they all know that stuff and you don't. And they don't realize that it's a secret code you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, hey, on Thursdays, we eat French fries, right? You walk in, even if you've been around for 6 months, you don't realize that that's a tradition necessarily. You might not notice, right? And so, God forbid, you set out, chicken nuggets, and the kids are like, what is this? We're not doing this. You didn't know the rules. And the stepmom's like, I thought you liked chicken nuggets. It's like, it is a secret code, and it's hard to navigate. Food is a big one that comes up, which is why I navigated the chicken nuggets. And people change, like, so this is what we eat in mom's house, this is what we eat over here, mom lets me have dessert, mom lets me do this, dad lets me do that. Those are things that come up pretty big. Routines, like, so if you've got teenagers and toddlers in the same house, they don't want to do the same thing. Like, so, like, hey, we're shutting off the lights at 7:30 is not popular for a 14-year-old. No.
So one thing that you just made me think of, that it's probably easier for grandparents than it would be for step parents, but deciding what the kids are going to call that person.
Right.
Can you offer any advice on that?
I mean, not really advice. What I'd like to offer people is that, just like, so, and grandparents, I'm so glad you led into that, right? There's no rules to this. It can really feel like there are rules. Like, so people will get hung up on that word stepmom and stepdad. But the same way grandparents get to decide, hey, do you want to call me Nana or Nini or Mimi or, goddess, grandma? I mean, there's some weirdo names out there for grandparents. Like, but whatever, like, nobody, it's like, whatever. And especially if you have a big family, like, so with great grandparents and things, sometimes you have to be careful that they don't duplicate, right? Like, so if one person is Gamma, the other person needs a slightly different name, right? Because the kids can't say anything. I want to offer to people that you get to choose if you want to. If you have a hang up on what a word means or the weight of a word, just, do whatever works out. My stepkids called me Amy, right? So they were introduced to me. I was young. I was like, hey, this is my girlfriend, Amy. And that was the name they used. It never even occurred to me. And we were at I think we were at like an arcade, right? And I was the adult around, and the person behind the counter, who was definitely an authority on what people should be called, he was probably 14, maybe 16 and whatever. And I was standing there, and they were like, who can approve you to go on this ride or whatever. And they looked at me, they were like, she can, this is the person who can do it. And the person said, oh, is that your stepmom? And we all looked at each other like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, that's it. Yes, I am, And so, yeah, I would put as much effort and as much weight behind it as you want to, that works for you, because there's nothing that really comes with it officially. And so that gives you the freedom to choose what you want to be called. So there we go.
All right. No, that helps. Now for step parents, and I'm sure there's things that you'll find surprising, obviously, as life goes on. But one thing that probably wouldn't be considered is just like legal authority, for example.
Right. Step parents actually don't have any, unless it's designated specifically. So in my case, my stepkids have 2 living parents, right? So I am a step parent. I have all the authority of the neighbor next door, right? Which is to say none. And then, we've, as needed, I would be on the phone to pick them up or do whatever, or sign for them in the hospital and things like that. But there are many situations, and in my family that works because there's 3 other adults, right? There's no, so those are those things. There are times where that can really be frustrating, and you have to put in legal things where somebody can step in as a guardian. And then there are ways to do that. It can be very frustrating in some blended families where a step parent, and in good and bad ways, right? Sometimes a step parent will be overstepping, trying to make decisions that there are other people who should or feel like they should be making, right? And in other cases, there are biological parents who are not doing things that perhaps need to be done. And a step parent might feel frustrated because they want to be able to do something for a child they love very much, and yet they don't have any authority to do it. So that is a reality of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
There are solutions, and like anything, I take a very stoic kind of it is the situation. You have to look at what you can do and what you want to do, and are there any other paths? Yeah.
Anything else as a consideration that that I didn't cover that maybe step parents that you see as maybe a common challenge that they just don't consider, and they're kind of flabbergasted when it comes up?
So I guess the thing is, the one that I like to talk about the most is that this is a role, and we've talked a lot about issues, right? What are the issues and how do we get past them, right? And my sort of like salmon swimming upstream, my song that I love to sing is that you can be very happy and enjoy your life as a step parent. And it's hard to find that when you're in a sea of, oh my gosh, this is the evil stepmom. This is this is all the conflict. This is all the toxicity. These are all the narcissists. This is all the problem. These are all the challenges. But if you choose to, and if you want to, and if you don't lose, it's easy to lose sight of that. It's easy to lose sight of that as parents, right? It's easy to get buried under the pressure and buried under the shoulds. But you can have a wonderful, wonderful life in a blended family. You can have a wonderful, happy, happy life and love it with all of the things. And sometimes you just need somebody to pop in and say, hey, psst, you want some happiness? Because it's out there if you want it.
Mm-hmm. And that it's going to look different, just like
that's right.
A family that's not blended. Like we all do things differently, right? And I just, not by experience, but just from what I've seen, it's definitely something where you can try to go in as prepared as you want to, but I think it's really it's situational, right? You're just gonna attack as you go and try to deal and work together or as a family unit on the issues that arise, right?
100%. There's a kind of a thing that's like, you want to see God or the universe laugh, make a plan. Right? Make a plan. This is exactly how this is going to happen. And then, watch it just, rain down surprises. And I think that in many situations, right, the path to happiness involves allowing yourself to see that it's okay to be different. And with families, we don't even know all the differences. If we begin to think that somebody else is the same as us, we're probably wrong. We just because we don't see it necessarily, we don't know. And allowing yourself the flexibility to say, even if I don't think I look like what's next door, I'm gonna be happy anyway. I'm gonna love these people and live from my heart.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you about something that's just unrelated to being a step parent. I know one of the things that's a big passion for you is running. I know you've just looking at the information I have in front of me here, you're 7-time Ironman Triathlon finisher. How did all that start? Was it really just a way to get out of the house and get away from a house full of kids, or is this something you always?
Some of it was. I've been a runner since I was 12, so that definitely is just a piece of who I am. If I, that there's that coaching question people ask, "What's your ideal day?" Mine always starts with a run at sunrise, and not that every day starts that way. That's the way the hypothetical ideal day would start. And so I really do love that. And but yeah, having kids in the house. And I did that before I met my husband, right? So there was that, and it went from running to triathlon. But there definitely was an element when the kids were young that was my time. I did a lot of running with strollers, definitely, but there was also time where it was just me out there doing it and finding that satisfaction of achieving those goals. And in the middle of it, it's so funny because I mean, I knew that that's what I was doing, but I was always very much like, no, that's not why I'm running all these races. It's, it's who I am. It's my lifestyle. But the pandemic did force me to stop racing because there were no races. And then I really had to examine that. And I was able to see how it was such a benefit for me to have something where I could see what I was doing for myself and get little trinkets and totems for accomplishments I did. And it was valid because it is hard as a caregiver to see growth in yourself sometimes when you're putting so much effort into other people's things. We're celebrating, things that other people are doing all of the time. And I make a really good family dinner, but nobody ever stops and said, cheers and applauds and gives me a medal for that. But if I go run a 10K, right, there's all those people applauding and then they give me a medal and I'm like, yay! So yeah, there's definitely part of that.
Yeah. And you're filled up. Yeah.
I'm filled up. And it's absolutely, totally external validation and I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Awesome. Now, as we start to wrap up here, one thing I always like to do is, take the expertise of the individual we're speaking with at, taking their hindsight and hoping that it can be someone else's foresight. If you could go back in time and just have a 2-minute conversation with Amy Stone when you first met your husband, what advice would you give her?
So that's I like the way you spun that because that question, part of that question of if you knew then what you know now, what would you do differently? That was the top question I used to get as a brand new coach. And I used to have a canned answer that, I would go and it grated with me a little tiny bit because, right, it forces me to judge the decisions that I made. Right. And the reality is I can't go back and change it. And, with marriages and with families, there's a danger in saying to yourself, it's valid. Like if I burn this down, what will happen? Right. But there's a danger in saying, hey, if I didn't do this, where would I be now? Because you can't undo some of these things. Right. You can't undo some of these things. But the question, the way you phrased it, which is so much better, which is, what can you learn from me to avoid some of the mistakes that I might have made? The number one thing, I had no idea what it was like to live with small children. As I learned about early childhood stages of development, I looked back and I was like, oh, I was such a weenie to those little kids. Like I was, I thought they should be quieter. I was sure they were too loud. I was positive and I was wrong. I was totally wrong. I thought they should have better manners. Also very, very wrong. I thought that they should sleep a lot better than they did and be more independent than they were. Totally wrong. So, so as much as you can, but how do you learn that before you have kids? Are you going to go get a degree in it? Probably not. Right. But the awareness that maybe you don't know and looking for other people to advise you on what you don't know is what I offer to people. Like, so the example I give, right? Like, so there's a point in children. How old are your kids, guys?
So we have a 13-year-old, 11-year-old twins, and a 6-year-old.
Okay. So you know this then, right? Around 6, 7, they start to lie, right?
Yes.
Right. That's a phase, right? If nobody tells you that that's a phase, and quite even sometimes a sign that you've got a creative kid, right? You can go through the thing where you're like, do I have a sociopath in my house? Like, is that what's happening? Right. And so like, that's the example I give. Cause like, they're like, they're lying that they didn't brush their teeth. I know they didn't brush their teeth. I'm like, I know they're not very good at it. Right. This is a phase, but don't take it personally. They get better at the lying thing. Trust me, they do. But yeah, it's a phase. They don't want to get in trouble. So they're lying. But if nobody tells you that, it's like you think your house is burning down around you. And so that's one of the things that I didn't know. And the other thing that I think is really like helpful is, and I do have a thing. I have 10 lessons that I learned over 20 years of being a step parent that I offer up to people all the time. And a lot of them are based on communication. A lot of based on, loving yourself, right? Is that, this is, it's a very intense thing. Being a caregiver, being in a relationship, raising these kids is very, very intense, but it goes through a cycle, right? And it's important that we don't lose ourselves, right? So, lead for yourself, live for yourself, and live for your family all at the same time. They should work together. They should work together. But the same way we work really hard for our kids, if you do all of that and nothing for yourself, the streets of the interwebs are full of people who are like, oh my God, I blinked and I don't know where the last 20 years went. So.
Absolutely. Well, Amy, we appreciate you taking the time to share all this with us. Now, before we wrap up, what are some of the things that you're working on? What can we expect to see from you in the future? And I'll share the ways to get in touch with you, but feel free to share any of that as well.
Oh gosh, all the things. I have big dreams. No, so I have a manuscript of a book that will eventually come out. It has to go. It's currently with my husband. It has to go through the kids, and then it will release onto the world. I have a podcast that started coming out at the beginning of January. I offer one-to-one coaching, which is what I've specialized on, and I'm working on creating resources that people can get on demand. Because the big challenge, I don't know if you guys do coaching, the big challenge with coaching is actually getting the people together, right? So on demand, like sort of coursey type stuff allows people, when you're having your crisis at 3:00 in the morning, it's like,
you can click.
Right, exactly. Take my money and fix my problems. So those are the things that I'm working on now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so for anybody watching, I have Amy's website linked below. It's amysaysso.com. Also, her Instagram is @amysaysso_coaching. So we'll have that linked in the description as well. But for anybody who's actually watching versus listening, it's right there for you.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, for sure. Amy, thank you again for taking the time. We appreciate it. And for everyone who watched or listened, thank you for letting us disrupt your everyday.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.